Why would a man who had everything feel like he had nothing? How could a 21-year-old, just on the edge of becoming the most famous person in the world, sing a song about a place so empty? Did he already know his future? Was the Heartbreak Hotel a real place, or was it a room he was already building inside himself? Number 17, why choose such a dark song first? Elvis Presley's contract with Sun Records was sold to RCA Victor on November 21st, 1955. The price was an unprecedented $40,000. It was a massive gamble for RCA and a life-changing event for Elvis. Everyone was watching. The pressure was immense. His first recording session for the new label was set for January 10th, 1956 in Nashville. This was his introduction to the world. He could have chosen any song. He could have recorded a fast-paced rock and roll number, something like his Sun hits. He could have picked a sweet ballad to make the girls swoon. That would have been the smart commercial move. It's what the executives at RCA wanted. They wanted a guaranteed hit. They wanted to build on the energy of That's All Right or Mystery Train. They wanted the boy who could sell records, but Elvis chose something different. He chose Heartbreak Hotel. The song was co-written by Mayborn Axton, a high school teacher and publicist, and Tommy Durden, a steel guitar player. They gave Elvis a co-writing credit, common practice to entice a big star to record a song. Elvis heard the demo and felt an immediate connection. He knew instinctively that this was the one. He fought for it. The RCA executives were horrified. The head of A&R, Steve Scholes, was worried. Chet Atkins, the legendary guitarist and producer who was in the session, thought the song was a dud. He famously told his boss, "They've ruined him." The sound was strange. The lyrics were morbid. The vibe was dark and bluesy, but not in a way people were used to. It didn't sound like a hit. It sounded like a career mistake. Think about the courage that took, or the stubbornness. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a deep personal need. At 21, Elvis was already a veteran of the road. He had spent months driving from town to town, playing small shows, sleeping in cheap motels. He knew what loneliness felt like. He knew the emptiness of a room after the applause dies down. He had grown up poor in Tupelo, Mississippi. He was an outsider, the quiet kid with the guitar who dressed differently. He lost his identical twin brother, Jesse Garon, at birth. That was a shadow that followed him his entire life. A part of him was always missing. So when he heard a song about a lonely place at the end of a lonely street, it wasn't just a story to him. It was a feeling he understood in his bones. He wasn't just performing a song. He was making a statement. He was telling the world, this is who I am. I'm not just a smiling kid with the swiveling hips. There's a darkness here too. He insisted on releasing it as his first single. And he was right. The song went to #1. But its success doesn't change the fact that his first message to the world was not one of joy or celebration. It was a warning, a postcard from a place he already knew too well. Number 16, what was the lonely street in real life? The song wasn't just pulled from thin air. It has a grim, real-world origin. A man in his late 20s died in a hotel room in a southern city. He left behind a short note. The note didn't explain much. It just had one haunting line, "I walk a lonely street." Mayborn Axton read about this story in a newspaper. The phrase stuck with her. "I walk a lonely street." It was so simple, so visual, and so deeply sad. It captured a specific kind of despair, the kind where you can be surrounded by people and buildings and noise, but feel completely and utterly alone. She told her writing partner, Tommy Durden, about it. He immediately saw the potential. He said, "Everybody in the world has someone who walks a lonely street." They started building a story around that single desperate line. They imagined a place at the end of that street. A place where all the lonely people go. A hotel. A heartbreak hotel. The details started to fall into place. The bellhop with tears in his eyes. The desk clerk dressed in black. The endless gloom. It was a place of permanent sorrow. A final destination for the brokenhearted. When they pitched the song to Elvis, they weren't just pitching a catchy tune. They were sharing this story of profound isolation, and it resonated with him on a level that nobody could have predicted. He didn't just hear a potential hit, he heard a truth. Elvis had spent his young life walking his own lonely street. He was the only surviving child in a poor family. His bond with his mother, Gladys, was incredibly intense, almost suffocating. He didn't have many close friends outside of a small circle. He was different. Even as his fame began to grow, that loneliness didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. The more people screamed his name, the more isolated he felt. He was becoming a product, an image. The real person was getting lost. The lonely street was no longer just a metaphor in a song. It was becoming the path he was forced to walk every day. He was surrounded by fans, by handlers, by people who wanted something from him, but who was there for him. Who understood the boy from Tupelo. The song gave a name to the feeling that was starting to define his existence. He wasn't just singing about a fictional character. He was singing about himself. The man in that hotel room left a note with a single sentence. Elvis Presley took that sentence and turned it into an anthem for his own life. Number 15. Why does the song sound so empty? The recording of Heartbreak Hotel was a strange and experimental process. RCA's Nashville studio was a new environment for Elvis. At Sun Records, Sam Phillips had cultivated a raw, intimate sound. They called it slapback echo. It was warm and close. But for Heartbreak Hotel, the producers wanted something different. They wanted to create a mood. They wanted the sound to match the lyrics. They wanted to make the music sound as lonely as the hotel itself. They achieved this with a simple but brilliant trick. The studio had a long tiled hallway. They'd place a speaker at one end of the hall and a microphone at the other. They fed Elvis's voice and Bill Black's bass through the speaker. The sound traveled down the empty corridor, bouncing off the hard surfaces, and was picked up by the microphone. The result was a cavernous, ghostly echo. It doesn't sound like a typical studio reverb. It sounds real. It sounds like Elvis is singing in a vast, empty ballroom or a deserted train station. His voice hangs in the air, then fades into nothing. There are no warm backup singers to comfort him. There are no layers of instruments to fill the space. There's just Elvis, his guitar, Bill Black's thumping bass, DJ Fontana's sparse drumming, and Floyd Kramer's haunting piano. Every note has room to breathe and room to die. The emptiness is part of the music. It's an instrument in itself. This sonic choice was radical for 1956. Pop music was supposed to be bright, full, and friendly. This was dark, sparse, and unsettling. It made the listener feel a little bit uncomfortable. It draws you in, but it also keeps you at a distance. This emptiness in the music mirrored the growing emptiness in Elvis's own life. Fame was creating a huge space around him. He was becoming untouchable, unreachable. People could see him, but they couldn't get close. He was performing for thousands of people, but he would go back to his hotel room alone. The echo in the song is the sound of that isolation. It's the sound of one voice crying out in a huge, empty space. It's the sound of fame. It's the sound of being the only one in the room, even when the room is full. The producers might have been trying to create a spooky mood for a song, but what they really captured was the sound of Elvis Presley's future. They built the first room in his personal Heartbreak Hotel. Number 14, who is the desk clerk dressed in black? The desk clerk's dressed in black. It's a striking image. It suggests more than just sadness. It suggests mourning. A permanent state of grief. When the song was written and recorded in 1956, Elvis was a young man with his whole life ahead of him. His mother, Gladys, was his rock. She was the center of his universe. Their bond was legendary. He called her by a pet name, Satinin. He bought her a pink Cadillac with his first big paycheck. He called her every single day when he was on the road. Her approval meant everything to him. But the song's lyric about a figure of permanent mourning would become terrifyingly real just 2 years later. On August 14, 1958, while Elvis was in the army, stationed in Germany, Gladys Presley died of heart failure. She was only 46 years old. Elvis was granted emergency leave to fly home for the funeral. He was completely destroyed. Those who were there said they had never seen such a display of grief. He wept uncontrollably. He threw himself over her casket. He said, "I've lost everything," and in many ways he had. A light went out in him that day, and it never came back on. He had lost his anchor. He had lost the one person in the world who loved him unconditionally, not for being Elvis the superstar, but for being her son. After her death, a profound sadness settled over him. It never left. He kept her room at Graceland exactly as she had left it. He talked to her picture. He was adrift. The lyric, "The desk clerks dressed in black," was no longer just a clever line in a blues song. It was a prophecy that had come true. For the rest of his life, Elvis was checked into a hotel of grief. And the desk clerk was a permanent reminder of his loss. Every success, every gold record, every sold-out show was tainted by the fact that he couldn't share it with her. The black-clad figure in the song became a symbol of his own unending mourning. He was surrounded by people, but the one person he needed was gone. The hotel was no longer a fictional place. It was the state of his own heart, and the desk clerk was there to remind him every single day that his stay was permanent. There was no checking out. Number 13. What did you'll be so lonely? You could die really mean. The line is simple and brutal. They're so lonely, baby. Well, they're so lonely. They're so lonely they could die. It's not a poetic metaphor. It's a blunt statement. The loneliness in this hotel is a fatal condition. For a young, healthy 21-year-old, this might seem like dramatic exaggeration, but for Elvis, it was a fear that would grow into a reality. The loneliness he experienced wasn't the normal, temporary kind. It was a deep, corrosive force that was intertwined with his fame. The more famous he became, the more isolated he was. He couldn't go to the store. He couldn't go to a movie. He couldn't eat in a restaurant. He became a prisoner in his own home, Graceland. To combat the loneliness, he surrounded himself with a group of friends and employees known as the Memphis Mafia. They were his companions, his bodyguards, his support system. They were with him 24 hours a day, but it was a paid companionship. They were on his payroll. He could create an illusion of a normal life, renting out amusement parks and movie theaters in the middle of the night. But it was still an illusion. He was the boss. He was the king. There was always a distance. He was the sun, and they were the planets that revolved around him. They could be his friends, but they could never truly be his equals. They couldn't understand the pressure he was under. They couldn't share the burden of being Elvis Presley. As the years went on, the loneliness deepened. His marriage to Priscilla fell apart. His movie career became a creative dead end. He turned to prescription medication to cope, to sleep, to wake up, to get through the day. The drugs only increased his isolation, creating a chemical wall between him and the rest of the world. He would spend days locked in his bedroom, reading, watching TV, and talking to people who weren't there. He was surrounded by people, but he was profoundly alone. The line from the song, "So Lonely They Could Die," became a chillingly accurate description of his later years. The loneliness was a sickness, and it was slowly, steadily killing him. It wasn't just a lyric anymore. It was a diagnosis. Number 12. Why did Graceland become a hotel? When Elvis bought Graceland in March 1957, it was a dream come true. It was a symbol of his success. A beautiful mansion on a hill where he could bring his parents and live in safety and comfort. It was supposed to be a home, a sanctuary, a place to escape the pressures of the world, but over time it transformed into something else. It became his personal Heartbreak Hotel. The gates that were meant to keep the world out also served to lock him in. As his fame grew, he became a prisoner there. The outside world was dangerous and chaotic. Inside, he could control his environment. But that control came at the cost of his freedom. Graceland became a place of perpetual night. Elvis was a notorious insomniac. He would sleep all day and stay up all night. The windows were blacked out. The clocks were often wrong. What time had no meaning. It was an artificial world created to his exact specifications. He filled the house with people, the Memphis Mafia, but their presence only highlighted his own isolation. They were there to serve him, to entertain him, to protect him, but who was he talking to? Who was really listening? The house was full of noise and activity, but at its center was a profound silence. The rooms were filled with lavish furniture and gold records, but they were also filled with a deep sense of melancholy. The song describes a hotel where people go when they have nowhere else to turn. Graceland became that place for Elvis. You know, it was his fortress against the world, but it was also his cage. You know, he had everything a person could want within those walls. A movie theater, a racquetball court, his own private jungle room. But he didn't have the one thing he craved: a normal life. The loneliness described in the song, the feeling of being trapped in a place of sorrow, was the reality of his life at Graceland. He had found a new place to dwell, just like the song said. But the mansion on the hill had slowly, imperceptibly turned into the hotel at the end of Lonely Street. It was a beautiful prison, custom built for a king. Number 11, who were the broken-hearted lovers. The song paints a picture of the hotel's clientele. The broken-hearted lovers, they're crying in their beer. It's a community of the miserable, a place where sad people can be sad together. In a way, this is who Elvis saw as his true audience. Not the screaming teenagers, not the critics, not the Hollywood producers. He felt a connection to the outcasts, the lonely ones, the people who felt like they didn't fit in. Because he was one of them. He never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the feeling of being poor and looked down upon. He understood heartache. It was a language he spoke fluently when he was on stage, especially in his later years in Las Vegas. You could see this connection. He would sing these incredibly sad songs, songs about loss and betrayal and loneliness, and he wasn't just performing them. He was living them. He would pour all of his own pain and sorrow into the music. The audience felt it. They weren't just watching a superstar, they were sharing a moment of collective sadness with a man who understood their pain. The broken-hearted lovers weren't just characters in a song, they were the people in the front row. They were the people listening to his records at home, feeling like he was singing directly to them. But there's another, more tragic interpretation. Elvis saw himself as one of these broken-hearted lovers. His own love life was a source of constant turmoil. His marriage to Priscilla was passionate, but ultimately doomed. He was the biggest star in the world, but he couldn't make his own marriage work. After they divorced, he had other relationships, but he never found that lasting connection he so desperately wanted. He was surrounded by adoration, but true, simple love seemed to elude him. He was perpetually one of the broken-hearted. So when he sang that line, he wasn't just describing the people in the fictional hotel. He was describing himself, sitting at the bar, crying in his own beer, surrounded by the ghosts of his failed relationships. The hotel was full of people just like him. It was the only place he truly belonged. Number 10, Why Will They Never Look Back? The song has a sense of finality. The people on Lonely Street, the residents of the Heartbreak Hotel, they'll never look back. This isn't a temporary stop. It's a one-way trip. Once you check in, you're there for good. This feeling of being trapped, of having no way to return to the past, was a central theme in Elvis's life. He was trapped by his own fame. He could never go back to being the anonymous truck driver from Memphis. He could never again experience the simple freedom of walking down the street unrecognized. His past was gone forever. The person he used to be was just a memory. This feeling was especially strong after he came out of the army in 1960. He was different. The world was different. Rock and roll had moved on. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, pushed him into a career of making terrible formulaic movies. For most of the 1960s, Elvis was creatively stifled. He was making a fortune, but he was miserable. He was singing silly songs for silly movies while the Beatles and Bob Dylan were changing the world. He felt like a joke. He was stuck in a golden cage, unable to make the music he wanted to make, unable to be the artist he wanted to be. He couldn't go back to the raw energy of the 1950s. That door was closed. He was on a path and there was no turning around. The residents of the Heartbreak Hotel don't look back because the past is too painful. It's a reminder of what they've lost. For Elvis, looking back was a reminder of his mother, of his early days at Sun Records, of a simpler time before the machinery of fame took over his life. It was easier to just keep moving forward, even if the road ahead was lonely and unfulfilling. The lyric captures the essence of his predicament. He was a man who had been pushed so far down Lonely Street that he couldn't even see the beginning of the road anymore. There was no going home. The only way was forward, deeper into the gloom of his own self-made hotel. Number 9, what is the meaning of the bellhop's tears? In the Heartbreak Hotel, even the staff is miserable. The bellhop's tears are falling. It's not just the guests who are sad. The sadness permeates the entire building. It's in the walls, it's in the air. The people who work there are just as trapped as the people who stay there. This is a perfect metaphor for Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia. They were his friends, but they were also his employees. Their job was to be with him, to cater to his every whim, to protect him from the outside world. They lived a life of incredible luxury. They had cars, money, and access to the most famous man on the planet. But it came at a price. Their lives revolved around Elvis. They had to be available 24/7. They had to laugh at his jokes, watch the movies he wanted to watch, and eat the food he wanted to eat. They sacrificed their own families, their own ambitions, their own identities to be part of his world. And they had to watch the man they loved slowly self-destruct. They saw his mood swings. They saw his reliance on prescription drugs. They saw his loneliness and his despair. They tried to help, but he was the king. No one could tell him what to do. They were powerless to stop his decline. They were like the bellhop in the song, forced to carry the baggage of a broken man, their own tears falling as they watched him suffer. Their sadness was a reflection of his own. They were the mirrors that showed him the pain he was in. He surrounded himself with people, but he only made them as lonely as he was. They were all residents of the Heartbreak Hotel, just with different job titles. The bellhop's tears are the tears of the Memphis Mafia, the tears of people who loved Elvis but couldn't save him from himself. They were part of the scenery in his grand, tragic play. Their grief was just another amenity in the saddest hotel in the world. Number 8, how can a street be lonely? The central image of the song is Lonely Street. It's a simple, powerful concept. A street is a public place. You know, it's supposed to be full of life, of people, of movement, but this street is different. It's a place of isolation. This paradox was at the heart of Elvis's existence. He lived his life on a public street. Every move he made was watched, photographed, and reported on. He was never truly alone. But he was always lonely. He was a public figure, but a private man. And the more public he became, the more he retreated into himself. The lonely street of his fame was a bizarre and distorted version of a real street. The people on it weren't neighbors. They were fans. They didn't want to know him. They wanted to own a piece of him. They screamed his name, but they didn't know his heart. He would look out from the stage at a sea of faces, thousands of people who adored him, and feel a profound sense of disconnection. He was giving them everything he had, his energy, his voice, his soul. But what was he getting in return? Adoration is not the same as love. Fame is not the same as friendship. The street was crowded, but he was walking it by himself. This feeling started early. Even in high school, he was the odd one out. The boy with the long sideburns and the flashy clothes. You know, people made fun of him. He would sit by himself and play his guitar. He was on his own lonely street long before he became famous. Fame just made the street longer and wider. It put up walls on either side, so he couldn't turn off. He was forced to keep walking, past the flashing cameras and the screaming crowds, towards the inevitable destination at the end of the road. The hotel, the song gave him the words for the path he was on. It named the strange, crowded, empty place where he was forced to live his life. Number 7. Why is there a hotel at the end of the street? A hotel is a temporary place, a place you stay when you're between destinations, but the Heartbreak Hotel is different. It's at the end of Lonely Street. It's a final stop. This suggests a sense of hopelessness and permanence. It's not a place you pass through on your way to somewhere better. It's the place you end up when there's nowhere else to go. For Elvis, this feeling of being at the end of the line became more and more pronounced as he got older. In the 1950s, he was at the beginning of the street, full of energy and potential. But by the 1970s, he seemed to have reached the end. His 68 comeback special was a triumph. It was a brief return to the artist he once was, but it was a fleeting victory. He soon found himself in a new kind of trap, the Las Vegas residency. He performed 2 shows a night for weeks on end. It was a grueling schedule. The performances were often brilliant, but they were also repetitive. It was a routine. It was a job. He was a living legend, but he was also a museum piece, performing his greatest hits for tourists. He was at the top of the bill, the king of Vegas, but it felt like an ending. He was no longer creating new, groundbreaking music. He was reliving his past. The hotel at the end of the street is a place of resignation. It's where you go when the journey is over. Elvis felt like his journey was over. He had conquered the world, but he was bored and uninspired. He was tired. The prescription drugs, the unhealthy diet, the punishing schedule, it was all taking its toll. He was physically and emotionally exhausted. He was living in his own private Heartbreak Hotel, the penthouse suite at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was a place of immense luxury, but it was also a place of deep despair. He had reached the end of his own lonely street, and he knew on some level that there was no way out. He had checked in, and the stay was permanent. Number 6, what does "Since My Baby Left Me" represent? The song opens with a classic blues trope. Well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. It's the catalyst for the entire journey to the Heartbreak Hotel. The loss of love is what sends the narrator down Lonely Street. In Elvis's life, this line would echo again and again. The most significant Bobby who left him was, of course, Priscilla. They had met when she was just 14. He had, in many ways, created her in his own image. He molded her into his ideal woman. Their love story was a fairy tale, but the reality was much more complicated. He was often absent on the road or making movies. He was unfaithful, he was controlling, she was living in his world, by his rules. When she finally left him in 1972, he was devastated. It was a rejection he couldn't handle. His ego was shattered. But it was more than that. He had lost his family. He had lost the one stable thing in his chaotic life. He was truly alone. He never really recovered from the divorce. He wrote songs about it. He talked about it on stage. He became obsessed with it. It was the great failure of his life. He was Elvis Presley. He could have any woman in the world, but he couldn't keep the one he claimed to love the most. The opening line of his first hit single had become the story of his life. But "My Baby" can be interpreted in other ways too. The Bobby that left him could be his own youth, the simple joy and energy of his early career. By the 1970s, that was gone. He was tired and bloated, a shadow of the beautiful young man he had been. The Bobby could also be his mother, Gladys. When she left him, he was forced to find a new place to dwell, a world without her guidance and unconditional love. The line is so powerful because it speaks to all of these losses. The loss of romantic love, the loss of innocence, the loss of his mother. Each loss was another reason to make a reservation at the Heartbreak Hotel. Each departure left him more alone, more convinced that the hotel was the only place he belonged. Number 5. Why is the vocal performance so raw? Listen to Elvis's voice on Heartbreak Hotel. It's not the smooth croon of a pop singer. It's raw, guttural, and full of pain. He slurs the words. He hiccups. He almost screams at times. It's a performance of pure, unvarnished emotion. He's not just singing the lyrics, he's feeling them. This was a radical departure from the polished vocal styles of the day. It was real. It was dangerous. It was the sound of someone on the edge. You can hear the loneliness in his voice. You can hear the desperation. The echo only amplifies it, making his voice sound even more isolated and vulnerable. This raw vocal style was a hallmark of his early recordings. It was what made him so exciting. He wasn't afraid to sound imperfect. He was willing to let his emotions show. He was channeling the blues singers and gospel quartets he had grown up listening to. He was singing from his soul. But on Heartbreak Hotel, it's different. It's not just bluesy, it's despairing. He sounds older than his 21 years. He sounds like a man who has seen too much, who has felt too much pain. It's a performance that is deeply unsettling. As he got older, his voice became more polished, more operatic. The raw edges were sanded down. But when he performed Heartbreak Hotel live, especially in his later years, some of that raw pain would come back. But it was a different kind of pain. It was the pain of a man who had lived the song. In 1956, he was a young man imagining what it would be like to be so lonely you could die. In 1976, he was a man who knew exactly what that felt like. The vocal performance was no longer an act of imagination. It was a confession. It was the sound of his own breaking heart. Number 4. Why did RCA hate the song so much? The executives at RCA Victor were in the business of selling records. They had just paid a fortune for Elvis, and they wanted a return on their investment. They wanted a surefire hit. They wanted a song that was catchy, upbeat, and commercial. Heartbreak Hotel was none of those things. It was slow. It was moody. The lyrics were about a place where people were so sad they could die. The sound was echo-laden and strange. It didn't sound like anything else on the radio. From a purely commercial standpoint, it was a terrible choice for a debut single. Steve Scholes, the RCA executive who had signed Elvis, was in a panic. He had staked his career on this kid. He thought the song was a morbid mess. He and others at the label tried to talk Elvis out of it. They begged him to record something else, anything else. They had other songs ready to go, songs that were much more in line with what was popular at the time. But Elvis wouldn't budge. He believed in the song. He felt it. He knew it was the right choice. This was his first major battle with a record label, and he won. He insisted that Heartbreak Hotel be his first single. The label's reaction shows just how much of an outlier the song was. It was a piece of art in a world of commerce. It was a dark personal statement in a genre that was supposed to be about fun and rebellion. RCA's fear and confusion proved that Elvis was not just a pop star, he was an artist with a unique vision. He was willing to take risks. He was willing to alienate the very people who were paying him. He needed to sing this song not because he thought it would sell, but because it expressed something deep inside him. The fact that the men in suits didn't get it only proves how personal and authentic the song truly was. It wasn't for them, it was for him. Number 3, what is the significance of "Hey, New Place to Dwell"? The line, "I found a new place to dwell," is key to understanding the song's meaning for Elvis. It's a line about transition, about moving from one state of being to another. The narrator has left his old life behind, a life that presumably had love and happiness. Now he lives somewhere new, a place defined by heartbreak. This journey from a place of connection to a place of isolation was the defining narrative of Elvis's life. He was constantly moving, constantly searching for a place to dwell, first from the poverty of Tupelo to the relative hope of Memphis. Then, from the anonymity of Memphis to the global stage of fame, each move took him further away from his roots, from a sense of self. Fame became his new place to dwell, and it was a strange and lonely place. It was a world of hotel rooms, of backstage areas, of limousine interiors. It was a world without privacy, without normalcy. He tried to build a home at Graceland, but as we've seen, that became its own kind of hotel. He tried to build a home with Priscilla, but that fell apart. He was a wanderer, a man without a true home. His only permanent address was the one described in the song. The Heartbreak Hotel was his final dwelling place. The word dwell is important. It doesn't mean visit. It means to live in or at a specified place. It implies permanence. The narrator isn't just passing through. He has moved in. This is his new reality. For Elvis, fame was not a temporary condition. It was a life sentence. The loneliness that came with it was not a fleeting mood. It was the emotional landscape where he was forced to live. The song is not about a bad weekend. It's about a permanent change of address. It's an announcement that the old life is over and the new lonely life has begun. It was a prophecy Elvis would spend the next 21 years fulfilling. Number 2, how does the piano tell a story? The piano part in Heartbreak Hotel, played by Floyd Cramer, is one of the most distinctive elements of the record. It's not a typical rock and roll piano. It's not pounding out chords. It's playing a bluesy, off-kilter riff that adds to the song's eerie atmosphere. And Cramer plays with a stumbling, hesitant feel. The notes seem to trip over each other. It sounds like someone who has had too much to drink trying to play a sad song in a deserted bar late at night. It's the perfect accompaniment to Elvis's world-weary vocal. The piano provides the texture of the hotel. It's the sound of the leaky faucet, the creaking floorboards, the melancholy music drifting up from the lobby. It's a sound that is both haunting and beautiful. It represents the brokenness of the people in the hotel. It's a melody that has lost its way, just like the guests. It's a stark contrast to the driving, energetic piano playing that would characterize the work of other rock and roll pioneers like Jerry Lee Lewis or Little Richard. This was something different. It was subtle. It was moody. It was atmospheric. The piano part is another example of how every element of the recording was designed to create a feeling of desolation. It works in perfect harmony with the cavernous echo and the sparse arrangement. It's the sound of loneliness made audible. And Elvis's life was full of this kind of dissonance, the glamorous, exciting public image, and the sad, stumbling, private reality. The piano in Heartbreak Hotel is the sound of that private reality. It's the soundtrack to the quiet moments of despair, the long nights when the applause had faded and he was left alone with his thoughts. It's a small detail in a famous song, but it's a heartbreakingly accurate portrait of the man who sang it. Number one, was the hotel a real place? In the end, it doesn't matter if there was a real Gunter Hotel or a real man who left a real note, because the Heartbreak Hotel was a real place. It was a place Elvis Presley built for himself, room by room, over the course of his life. The foundation was laid in his childhood, with the loss of his twin and the loneliness of being different. The walls went up with the pressures of fame, trapping him inside. The furniture was the grief he felt after his mother died. The staff were the well-meaning, but powerless people around him. The other guests were the ghosts of his lost loves. He was the proprietor and the sole permanent resident. He decorated the rooms with gold records and sequin jumpsuits, but they were still lonely rooms. He could fill the halls with laughter and noise, but he couldn't escape the profound silence at its core. He sang about it on his very first single for a major label. He warned us, he told us where he was heading. He gave us the address down at the end of Lonely Street. We just thought it was a song. We didn't realize it was a map. The ultimate heartbreaking detail is the song itself. The fact that a 21-year-old at the dawn of his incredible success chose to introduce himself to the world with a song of such profound despair. He wasn't celebrating his newfound fame. He was mourning the loss of the life it would take away from him. He was checking into the hotel, and he was telling us, and maybe himself, that he would never be able to leave. The song is not just about loneliness. It's about the specific loneliness of Elvis Presley. A loneliness so vast, so complete, that you could build a hotel in it. And he did. And he lived there by himself for the rest of his life.